Hello and welcome to Global Lens. Over the next 30 minutes, we put the spotlight on all the top stories from around the world. I'm Parikshit Luthra. These are the big stories we are tracking for you. Thousands flee Tehran after a new wave of Israeli attacks. Iran's supreme leader says the country will never surrender and warns United States of serious consequences if it gets directly involved. This comes after President Trump demanded unconditional surrender and threatened direct US strikes. Prime Minister Modi and President Trump hold a 35-minute phone conversation. Modi tells Trump that India never has and never will accept third-party mediation on Pakistani dispute. Clarifies that no discussions were held with the United States on mediation or a trade deal during Operation Sindoor. President Trump is scheduled to host the Pakistani Army General at the White House today. India and Canada take the first steps to reset the strained relationship. Both nations agreed to appoint ambassadors after Prime Minister Modi meets Prime Minister Carney. The diplomatic ties were scaled down after Canada alleged India's involvement in the killing of a Sikh separatist in 2023. Let's go straight to the market action. Global markets are trading mixed as tensions between Iran and Israel continue to rise. Here's how the Asian markets ended today. Indian stocks closed with minor gains after a volatile day. Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi gained over 0.5% each, while China's Shanghai Composite ended flat. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index ended 1% lower. European stocks were also in mixed territory. Meanwhile, investors on the Wall Street kept a keen watch on the Fed's monetary policy decision. Oil prices neared a 5-month high amid the West Asia tensions. The Israel-Iran conflict has entered the 6th day. Thousands are fleeing Tehran after several explosions rocked the city. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei showed defiance in a televised address. He said Iran will never surrender and warned the United States of serious consequences if it gets directly involved. This comes after President Trump demanded Iran's unconditional surrender and threatened direct US strikes. Israeli defense forces claim to have struck factories producing centrifuges and weapons. Major explosions were reported in Tehran overnight. The extent of the damage remains unclear. Meanwhile, Iran fired a pair of ballistic missile barrages at Israel. Sirens and explosions were heard over Tel Aviv. Israel said it intercepted most of the missiles. According to a human rights agency, more than 550 people have been killed across Iran. At least 24 people have been killed in Israel. What will US direct involvement mean for both the countries? Joining us now is Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Director of the Iran Program at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you very much for being with us. Let me begin by asking you, Behnam, that Ayatollah Khamenei has said Iran is not going to accept President Trump's call for unconditional surrender. Where does this leave us in this current crisis in the Middle East?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. It likely means that in the short term, there may not be a diplomatic off-ramp in the making, particularly because of A, the defiance of the rhetoric of the supreme leader that you mentioned there, but B, the military success thus far that the Israelis are enjoying, basically picking apart large elements of the Iranian defense apparatus in the west and central parts of the country. Thus far, the Iranian main response to Israel has been surface-to-surface missile attacks. Now it looks like the regime is having to engage in those surface-to-surface missile attacks from deeper in its own territory, and Israel is still intercepting large swaths, but unfortunately not all of those. And the X factor thus far means that President Donald Trump's decision here, whether to do what he's been saying he would do and go after potentially the supreme leader of Iran, or, for example, one could say to enter the conflict and go after the buried subterranean nuclear facilities at Fordo, that too could be up to him, but all eyes will be on the U.S. To change this current equation.
Right. Ayatollah Khamenei has also said that in case U.S. makes a direct attack on Iran in support of Israel, there will be irreparable damage. How do you think Iran could retaliate in case the U.S. gets into this war?
Well, there were two threats that were made even before the U.S. was considering entering that had great import for the U.S. One was the decision to potentially leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Parliament was discussing that over the weekend, as well as comments by several other, or what's left of them, senior Iranian military officials to potentially close the Strait of Hormuz. That was up until you saw more forward-leaning rhetoric from the president. In response to that, I think Western media outlets, including the New York Times, said that Iran was quote unquote preparing missiles. That probably means that they're fueling missiles, taking them out of storage. This is the shorter range stuff that might be able to hit the constellation of U.S. bases much closer to Iranian territory, for example, just across in the Persian Gulf or in Iraq or elsewhere. So that probably might be the main threat vector that the Iranians put to the U.S. here.
Right. How do you read the presence of General Asim Munir in the United States? President Trump is going to be having lunch with the Pakistani army chief at the White House. This is unprecedented. If you look at the protocol, no president sits down with an army chief for lunch. In this current context, how do you see Pakistan being important for the U.S. because Pakistan shares a border with Iran?
Pakistan does indeed share a border with Iran, and many in the audience may not know this, but in 2024 was a historic year for Iran's ballistic missile barrages because not once, not twice, but three times Iran directly fired ballistic missiles as a non-nuclear country at the territory of a nuclear country. And if you may remember, January 2024 was actually at Pakistan. Pakistan also responded with a smaller barrage of its own, and both countries had called it quits. I don't think the rest of the meeting, however, meaning the potential meeting between the Pakistani general and the U.S. president, is going to necessarily be dominated by Iran, but I don't think that it also would be ignored either. I think it has much more to do with the situation around India, the politics of who mediated what when, and of course, even though it's diplomatically unprecedented and it may bend but not break the diplomatic protocols that you mentioned, there is the old saying about Pakistan being a military with a country. So in many ways, Donald Trump may be looking to bypass the civilian establishment to really see what is going on the ground there as the U.S. has become a little bit more disinterested, shall we say, in South Asia after the 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal, unless, of course, it is seen through the prism of great power competition, which makes America a much closer partner of India, not Pakistan.
Right. I would also ask you about the possibility of a larger war in the Middle East. It seems that would become the situation in case U.S. gets into the attack. But what's at stake for the U.S. and how badly do you think the U.S. could be impacted in case there is a full-fledged war and U.S. gets involved?
Well, if the Islamic Republic does decide to widen the war, there is no doubt that they will be able to land blows, not decisive blows, but there is no doubt that they will be able to land blows at U.S. basing and other military infrastructure much closer to Iranian territory for the sheer fact that Iran still has large elements of its short-range ballistic missile intact. In military terms, short-range ballistic missiles are missiles that go under 1,000 kilometers. A lot of that installation is nearer to Iranian territory, and Iran's shorter range projectiles are much more suited to be precision strike or tactical or battlefield weapons. So the chances of direct hits against those bases does unfortunately rise. However, the Iranians would be essentially taking a massive gamble here, because I could easily see the president responding directly and forcefully against Iranian territory, probably even civilian and military leadership alike in that instance, given the fact that in 2019, in the first term, Donald Trump's threshold for the use of military force in the region was the loss of American life. And given that already we're living through different gradations of a Middle East regional war since October 7, the stakes are already high.
All right. Behnam, I request you to stay on with us. President Trump has been speaking outside the White House in the last few minutes. Here's what he said on the situation in Iran.
Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble. and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before? All this death and destruction. Why didn't you negotiate? I said to the people, why didn't you negotiate with me 2 weeks ago? You could have done fine. You would have had a country.
All right, so that was Donald Trump. Behnam, you heard Donald Trump saying there, I'm not going to tell you when we would carry out, but I may or may not attack Iran, and Iran wants to negotiate. I told them that why didn't you start negotiating 2 weeks back? What do you think is Donald Trump's intention here? There are a lot of speculation that US and Israel both want a regime change. Can they bring this out together in Iran?
Well, before we get to the regime change question, which I think is worth exploring here, because if there is a flip in Tehran, meaning if one is able to decapitate and really flip the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism and actually somehow find a way to empower the Iranian people, you would have a drastically different balance of power in the Middle East. And that actually might even free up U.S. assets, interest, and attention to focus on more tier one 21st century state threats, be they Russia or China. But before that, obviously, is the threat the president levied himself. And there is a certain amount of uncertainty the president has been trying to cultivate. You can even say diplomatically try to weaponize in some of the social media posts he's been giving, and as you mentioned, in some of the media statements he's been making as well. This is designed to increase the agony of decision-making, in my view, for the Iranians, but also to give the president diplomatic leverage. And I think option number one here for the president is not the military option. It's not even the regime change option. The president has been remarkably consistent, both in term one and term two, and even campaigning before term one and term two, that what he seeks is a diplomatic resolution. So even though we've been living through 5, if not 6 days of the Israeli military neutering or defanging large elements of the long-range strike capability of the Islamic Republic and doing some but not doing some damage, but not destroying all of the atomic infrastructure in that country, I think the president may look to try to build on military success towards potentially a deal. That's why there is this steady drumbeat. But if the Iranians do genuinely widen the war, or if they continue to strike civilian centers, or if somehow an American citizen is killed or is roped into this, then I think the regime might be signing its death warrant, and that would move us towards that conversation potentially about regime change without actually having a regime change policy. I mean, I'm critical of this because no doubt the U.S. did botch everything in 2003 in Iraq and much later on in Afghanistan, but Iran is not Iraq and Iran is not Afghanistan. You have at least 100 years of a population seeking representative government. And again, if you are able to flip that and empower the Iranian people, that would be a game changer. And the lack of a will to even try to think about a political plan for the day after in Tehran is what has actually impeded really critical, creative, and imaginary thinking for the U.S. And Israel here. And it's why we've been only taking a very narrow counter-proliferation view of this threat.
All right, Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you so much for joining us here on Global Lens, giving us your view on the very, very worrying situation between Israel and Iran and about the possibility of a larger war. Let's move on and get you more international news. At least 70 Palestinians have been killed and hundreds injured after Israeli forces opened fire on crowds waiting for aid in Gaza. The attack involved tank shells, drones, machine guns. Since the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation began distributing aid in May, over 300 people have died while trying to collect aid. Hospitals in the region are overwhelmed and under-resourced. A big legal victory for Apple. A U.S. appeals court has overturned a patent ruling worth $300 million. The ruling had held Apple infringe on patents held by IP management firm Optus Wireless Technology. The appeals court ruled the jury instructions in the original trial were flawed. The U.S. Senate has passed a landmark stablecoin bill establishing regulatory rules for dollar-pegged cryptocurrencies. The bill is a significant development for the crypto world as well as President Donald Trump's personal financial interests in crypto. The Trump-linked stablecoin is currently valued at $2 billion in the market. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy has warned employees that the AI advancements may lead to a reduction in jobs. In a memo to employees, Jassy stressed upon the importance of AI upskilling. He said that as the company rolls out generative AI, the manner in which work is done will change and fewer people will be needed for the jobs that are done today. Amazon has cut over 27,000 jobs since 2022. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has openly criticized Meta for allegedly attempting to poach top AI talent from the company through financial incentives. On a podcast hosted by his brother Jack Altman, Sam revealed that Meta offered sign-on bonuses of up to $100 million to recruit key engineers from OpenAI. It's time for a quick break, but coming up on the other side, India and Canada agree to reset ties after months of tensions over the Niger row. Strategic Affairs Expert Brahma Chellaney joins us on the other side to decode the significance of the ties. Welcome back. India and Canada have taken the first steps to reset their strained relationship. Both nations have agreed to appoint high commissioners to each other's capitals. The big breakthrough came after Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Prime Minister Mark Carney on the sidelines of the G7 summit. The move comes nearly 2 years after the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, alleged India's involvement in the killing of Sikh separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in 2023. Ties came to a complete standstill last year after Ottawa linked India's high commissioners and other diplomats to the murder. India also temporarily suspended some visa services for Canadians. Fast forward to 2025. Carney took over as Prime Minister and later extended an invitation to India for the G7 summit, although at the 11th hour. He said India needs to be a part of the important discussions. Prime Minister Modi accepted. During their meeting, the leaders reaffirmed the importance of bilateral ties and also discussed restarting the stalled negotiations on the early progress trade agreement. They discussed collaboration in areas such as clean energy, digital transformation, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, and also higher education as well. Now, let's understand why it is important to strengthen India-Canada ties. Trade between the two countries rose by 3.2% in FY25 to $8.6 billion. India's exports to Canada were worth $4.2 billion, while imports from Canada were $4.4 billion. India exports pharmaceutical products, auto parts, electronic goods, jewelry, among others, to Canada, while India imports minerals, pulses, iron and aluminium, scrap and paper. Improving ties could help Canada reduce its dependence on the United States. India is also a favorable investment destination for Canada. Canadian portfolio investments in India, particularly through pension funds, are estimated at more than $73 billion. At least 600 companies have a presence in India, while 1,000 are actively pursuing business interests in the India market. Indian companies are also active in the IT, financial services, and the health sciences sector in Canada. Canada is also home to one of the largest Indian diaspora abroad, with 1.8 million Indo-Canadians, 1 million NRIs as of 31st December last year. Over 3.9 lakh students are studying in Canada as well. To discuss what the reset in ties means for both countries, joining us on the show is Strategic Affairs Expert Brahma Chellaney. Mr. Chellaney, thank you very much for joining us on Global Lens. Give us a sense of what made both leaders come together and decide that let's resume the diplomatic and bilateral relationship.
India has always been invited to the G7 summits since 2019 in recognition of India's rising international profile, its growing geopolitical weight. So India was expecting an invite from Canada, which came at the 11th hour, about 9 or 10 days before the summit in Alberta. But for the Canadian Prime Minister, Carney, the decision to invite Modi was a very careful decision, a decision for which he received a lot of criticism at home. But it was an important decision that he took because largely due to the stagnating economy of Canada. Carney won the election in April on the promise to restore the momentum in Canadian economy. So one of the first tasks he has sought to achieve is to reset Canada's strained relations with China and India, the two giants. Carney is looking at how other G7 countries, like, for example, the UK recently signed a free trade agreement with India, and he understands that Canada needs India much more than India needs Canada. So his motivation was largely economic because without access to the large Indian market, Canada's economy cannot be revived. For India, accepting the invite was actually a given because India has been, Prime Minister Modi has attended all these other G7 summits. But once Modi agreed to Carney's invitation, then it became incumbent on both sides to achieve some diplomatic breakthrough on their strained relationship.
Right. What do you think was the decision that they took behind closed doors on the assassination of the Sikh separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar? Now, that was a major thorn in ties between the two countries. Canada was blaming Indian government officials for direct involvement. Do you think both the nations have managed to put that aside?
Nijjar's killing was the consequence of a deeply rooted problem in Canada-India relations that goes back to the first half of the 1980s, when Canada became a major stronghold of violent Khalistanis. That in turn led to the 1985 twin Air India bombings. Two separate Air India jetliners were bombed in 1985. In one bombing, all 329 people on board were killed. And the man, two Canadian inquiries identified as the mastermind of the twin bombings, Talvinder Parmar, was the guy that Canada's then Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, shielded. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at that time had actually sought the extradition of Talvinder Parmar, but Pierre Trudeau rejected the Indian request. Today, not only is Canada a hub of violent Khalistanis, it's become the global epicenter of the militant movement for Khalistan. So that has been the root cause of the strain in Canada-India relations. And of course, we know nothing about what the two leaders discussed in terms of Canada doing its part to rein in the Khalistanis, because they've agreed to restore the high commissioners who were kicked out. But as India said at that time, that Indian diplomats are unable to function freely in Canada because of threats to their physical safety. So did Canada assure India in the Carney-Modi meeting that it will take action against those that threaten the safety, the lives of Indian diplomats? We should not forget that in the run-up to the diplomatic row between Canada and India, Khalistanis in Canada were erecting billboards, public billboards, advocating the killing of Indian diplomats who were identified with photos on billboards. These same Khalistanis were honoring jailed or killed terrorists as martyrs. They were staging parade floats in Canada on which the assassination of Indira Gandhi was reenacted. And they even staged attacks on Indian diplomatic missions in Canada. So given that background, the return of high commissioners by itself doesn't mean much, especially if the Indian High Commissioner in Ottawa is not able to function freely. So we would like to know as to what assurances Canada provided to India. But I'm sure that the two sides have agreed, as their statements show, that and the language is fairly similar except for small differences. Both sides have agreed to revive the relationship based on mutual respect and respect for the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Right. Do you also feel, and you made that important point, that the Canada economy is slowing down? They need economies like India. They need a trade deal with India. And that statement that was issued by the Indian government also mentioned that both sides will resume work on the early progress trade agreement. Before the ties went down all the way to an all-time low in 2023, we were working on an early trade deal and that would have been signed. But do you feel that considering that both sides are now going to resume work on the trade deal and it's been put in black and white, means that we can expect progress and both nations have put economic ties before other political issues, more difficult political issues?
Not really. In fact, the reference to the Early Progress Trade Agreement, EPTA, as well as the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement is only found in the Indian readout. The Canadian readout doesn't mention that. The fact is that Canada is emphasizing the economic aspects. India wants Canada, on the other hand, to address the security and political issues. Obviously, the economic forward movement will depend on what Canada does in terms of addressing India's concerns about Canada becoming a global hub of the Khalistanis. But clearly, the fact that Canada and India traditionally have been friendly democracies. These are two large democracies in the world, or important democracies in the world, and it makes sense for Canada and India to restore their relationship, to rebuild the damaged ties. But this will take time because it's easier to damage a relationship than to rebuild it. And I think what we have seen so far in terms of the Carney-Modi meeting is the first step toward rebuilding a relationship. This relationship holds a lot of promise, and hopefully the two leaders, Carney and Modi, have set the direction for further engagement, for further discussions to rebuild this important relationship.
Mr. Chellaney, thank you so much for joining us. Indeed, a very important relationship. Let's see how things proceed. Moving on, Prime Minister Modi and US President Donald Trump held a 35-minute phone call after Trump cut short his G7 trip in Canada. This was the first direct conversation between them since Operation Sindoor. Prime Minister Modi maintained that there was no mediation by the US in the India-Pakistan tensions. Prime Minister Modi also stated that India has not and will not accept any form of mediation by third parties. But President Trump has once again claimed to have averted a war between India and Pakistan. Speaking outside the White House, Trump said he loves Pakistan and also called Prime Minister Modi a fantastic man. He went on to claim that he made a trade deal with both nations and stopped the war.
Well, I stopped a war between Pakistan. I love Pakistan. I think Modi is a fantastic man. I spoke to him last night. We're going to make a trade deal with Modi of India. But I stopped the war between Pakistan and India. This man was extremely influential in stopping it from the Pakistan side, Modi from the India side, and others. And they were going at it, and they're both nuclear countries. I got it stopped. I don't think I had one story. Did I have one story written about it? I stopped the war between two major nations, major nuclear nations.
Let's get you some trending news. The hype around Nintendo's newly released Switch 2 console takes the gaming giant's shares to a record high. The stock has jumped 46% in 2025, boosting its market value by approximately $39 billion. Usain Bolt has been awarded a special Guinness World Record Icon certificate as part of the organization's 70th anniversary celebration. Guinness World Records has officially named Usain Bolt a Guinness World Records icon. Usain Bolt holds two of the most iconic sprinting records in history, the fastest 100 meters at 9.58 seconds and the fastest 200 meters at 19.19 seconds, both set during his legendary performance at the 2009 World Athletics Championship in Berlin. Hollywood stars Scarlett Johansson, Jonathan Bailey and Mahershala Ali attended the world premiere of Jurassic World Rebirth in London. The film, directed by Gareth Edwards, follows a team of specialists who must obtain DNA samples from 3 dinosaurs to achieve a life-saving medical breakthrough. On Final Cut this evening, Mount Leo Tobi Laki Laki in Indonesia erupts, sending towers of ash clouds 11 kilometers into the air. The smoke from the volcano was visible from cities nearly 150 kilometers away. No casualties have been reported so far, but authorities have issued a high alert. Residents have been warned to stay cautious as heavy rains could trigger lava flows. Dozens of flights to and from the Indonesian island of Bali have been cancelled or delayed. That's all we have time for today on Global Lens. See you, same time, same place tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.